The White Star Line, arguably the most famous shipping line in history, but there's so much more to the company's story than just the Olympic class and a few scattered disasters around the turn of the century. Let's take an in-depth tour of the company's history from its very inception to the continued existence of the White Star Line name today. The original White Star Line. In Liverpool, 1845, two Englishmen, John Pilkington and Henry Wilson, founded a company to capitalize on the oceanic passenger services, mainly the Atlantic route, and the slow-growing Australian route. They intended to charter ships belonging to other companies and sail passengers and goods from Great Britain to the rest of the world. As their company grew, they would begin to purchase their own ships. They called this company the White Star Line. The early history of the White Star Line is spotty, poorly documented, and filled with nearly as many holes as their ships, but we can piece together a bit of a picture. Their first sailings were across the Atlantic Ocean on a ship that they chartered called the Elizabeth in 1846, a year after their founding, sailing between Liverpool and Montreal. In 1849, they purchased their first ship, allowing them to now build equity in their own fleet. This ship was a bark called the Iowa. Business was growing, but slowly. It was with the acquisition of the Iowa that the company established the red flag with the white star, which began the White Star Line house flag. In 1851, gold was discovered in Australia, and what was once a penal colony with mostly Aboriginals and a few 100,000 settlers was booming. The White Star Line began focusing most of their attention to the Australian routes and began expanding their clipper fleet, even purchasing the fastest clipper ship in the world, the American-built Red Jacket. But the same year, one of their chartered ships, the RMS Tellure, was lost en route to Melbourne, with a loss of around 360 souls. In the early 1860s, civil war was waging between the northern and southern United States, and prior to the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863, the United Kingdom was taking great interest in the Confederacy, even considering sending troops to support them, and beginning plans to open up commerce with them once they gained their independence and the Union blockades were lifted. A British shipping company called the National Line was founded to start transatlantic services with the southern states when peace was finally signed. However, the war turned in the summer of 1863 with the Union victory at the Battle of Gettysburg in Pennsylvania. The Confederacy lost the advantage, and the United Kingdom backed away from them. This doesn't have anything to do with the White Star Line. Yet. The company was struggling to find its room to grow and purchased its first steamship in 1863 called the Royal Standard, and in 1864 merged with two other companies, the Black Ball Line and the Eagle Line, forming the Oriental Steam Navigation Company. This was a dumb idea, so the White Star Line left the group and refocused their attention on the now prospering transatlantic routes, reinvesting large amounts of money into new ships. And just after spending all this money and taking out significant loans to refocus their market slice, oops, their bank, the Royal Bank of Liverpool, collapsed and closed their doors in October 1867. White Star Line immediately filed for bankruptcy and is liquidated. However, despite all this, the White Star Line still had a favorable image in the general public. The National Line, which had tried to get involved with the Confederacy in the Civil War, was now looking for new interests. The founder of it wanted to expand his scope. The founder of the National Line, a man named Thomas Ismay, turned to the now dead White Star Line, whose corpse was still warm, and bought it for £1,000. Thomas Ismay's White Star Line. It took him a couple years to find the funding needed to build the company and get the first ships underway. He didn't want to charter ships, he wanted to own them. In 1869, while playing billiards with other Liverpool merchants, a man named Gustav Schwab offered to finance the company's growth on one condition: that the White Star Line have all of their ships built by Schwab's nephew's company, Harland and Wolff. Ismay agreed, and the group of them very quickly drew up plans for their first liner, the SS Oceanic. It was here that the White Star Line decided on the tradition of having the letters IC at the end of the names of their ships. In 1870, Ismay brought on his friend, William Imrie, and they formed the Oceanic Steam Navigation Company, which became the parent company of the White Star Line. Their business strategy would be to focus on the Atlantic routes between Liverpool and New York, and after a year, they tapped into additional markets by stopping in Queenstown, Ireland, and running ships to Philadelphia and Boston as well. However, they didn't completely abandon their earlier routes, continuing to run smaller ships designed for large quantities of cargo to Australia, and later to other parts of the world. To add to the company revenue, Ismay worked out a contract with the British Royal Mail Service to carry mail on most of his ships, allowing many of them to bear the prestigious title of Royal Mail Ship. The White Star Line built their ships to dominate in not only speed, size, and luxury, but also in the comfort of their steerage passengers. The first class of ships, the Oceanic class, consisted of 6 nearly identical steamships. Though they got off to a rocky start with the maiden voyage of the Oceanic, breaking down only a couple of hours out to sea, the class later proved to be an absolute triumph, and 2 of them capturing the Blue Ribbon Award for fastest Atlantic crossing. These ships were also the largest in the world. Well, largest aside from the now laid-up Great Eastern. Although the early White Star Line of the 1850s and 60s suffered a few losses in their chartered vessels, Ismay's White Star Line didn't see major disaster until the loss of the steamship Atlantic in 1873, which crashed into the rocks of Halifax with a loss of over 500 souls. By 1874, the Oceanic class, now down to 5 ships, was already becoming outdated and were shown up by the latest feats of Harland and Wolff engineering, the Britannic and the Germanic, named in celebration of the 2 nations that the White Star Line Company executives were from. These ships were hugely successful, hugely reliable, and hugely huge. These were the largest ships in the world. Well, largest aside from the now rotting Great Eastern. Now let's tangent a bit. In the early 1870s, railroad companies in the United States worked out contracts with the Pacific Mail Steamship Company, servicing the routes between the American West Coast and Asia, and ships would sail from Asia to the West Coast, then dropped off their passengers to cross the U.S. by rail. However, after the contract was signed, the Pacific Mail Steamship Company decided to plan routes that deliberately bypassed these rail companies. Infuriated, the American railroad companies banded together and formed the Occidental and Oriental Steamship Company, which was to serve as a steamship line directly owned by the railroads. To do this, they needed ships. Thomas Ismay was very happy to charter out 3 ships to them, 2 cargo ships named the Gallic and the Belgic, and the prestigious flagship of the White Star Line, the Oceanic, which now became the flagship of the O&O Company. The White Star Line also supplied these ships with officers. Now, through the O&O Company, the White Star Line ships were running routes through the Pacific Ocean as well. White Star Line seemed more interested at that point in building ships for the purpose of chartering out to company partners. The SS Arabic was built, and almost immediately chartered out. The SS Coptic was built, and almost immediately chartered out. The White Star Line was now tapping into companies that serviced New Zealand, South America, and parts of Asia. All this expansion in their syndicated fleets left the Atlantic fleet vulnerable, and Ismay knew this. His rivals, the Cunard Line and the Inman Line, were launching newer ships that had gained favor with the public as more comfortable than the Oceanic and Britannic classes, and they were without a doubt faster. It was time for him to revamp his Atlantic fleet. Ismay was able to secure funding from the British government after agreeing that these next ships could be requisitioned as armed merchant ships in the event of a war, and in 1887 the construction of the Titanic and the Majestic began. These were each twice the size of the Britannic and the Germanic, and were the first ships of the White Star Line to be designed with second class in mind. Up to this point, White Star Liners only had saloon class and steerage, with the occasional attempt made to add a middle class, but this was never successful. These ships would once again be groundbreaking, and the Titanic may or may not have been one of the first things to get the ball rolling for the First World War. Oops, In 1889, prior to entering service, the Titanic participated in the Spithead Naval Review, where she was toured by Kaiser Wilhelm II as a guest of Queen Victoria and future King Edward VII. Kaiser Wilhelm reportedly said that Germany needs ships like these and immediately went home and started pushing Germany to build their own superliners, leading to a merchant and military rivalry between the two countries that built tensions until war finally broke out. But now we're getting ahead of ourselves. The Titanic and the Majestic, by the way, were the largest ships in the world. Well, largest that is, aside from the now billboard Great Eastern. They were using it as a billboard because they didn't know what else to do with it. It was time for the White Star Line to ditch some of their other ships and progressively sold off their remaining Oceanic class to continental European lines such as the Holland America Line and the Thingvalla Line. Both the Majestic and the Titanic won the Blue Ribbon, but the White Star Line was slowly realizing something. Competing for the Blue Ribbon was costly, and the ownership of the title was often very short-lived. If the company could focus on luxury and comfort and take their attention away from speed, their ships would have longer-lasting prestige and operate more profitably. And now, we enter the era of ships that everyone keeps forgetting the names of: luxury over speed. Despite the loss of the SS Neuronic, one of the company's livestock carriers in 1893, the White Star Line felt that they had enough cargo ships in the Atlantic and wanted to try their new strategy of luxury over speed as quickly as possible. In 1897, Harland & Wolff was currently building the livestock carrier Cymric, but the White Star Line asked for a complete redesign mid-construction. The livestock spaces were converted to third-class quarters, and the furnishings of the passenger spaces were upgraded to be more luxurious. This ship didn't gain much prestige, but Ismay knew that this was not because their strategy was bad, but mainly because it wasn't implemented from the start of construction. The Cymric, though not legendary, was profitable and reliable. In the past decade, the White Star Line commissioned about a dozen other ships to add to their fleet of charter ships, livestock haulers, and New Zealand and Australian ships. The company was growing and business was booming, but compared to the ships of the Cunard line, the White Star Line looked pitiful, especially when their most recent premier ship was the Cymric, a converted cargo liner. Ismay needed to do something. In 1897, the same year the Cymric entered service, the German Norddeutscher Lloyd liner, Kaiser Wilhelm der Grosse, became the largest and most luxurious ship in the world. See, remember Kaiser Wilhelm? Here he is. He's got the biggest and most luxurious ship now, and that was all inspired by the Titanic. That's what happens when you show off your stuff. People go home and copy it. And now Germany has the largest ship in the world. Well, largest, aside from the now scrapped Great Eastern. Ismay wanted to retake the shipping industry by force. He wanted a ship that was going to be the largest, safest, and most luxurious ship ever built. And it was time to replace his Atlantic fleet. The Adriatic was all he still owned from the Oceanic class, the Britannic and the Germanic were now old and breaking down, and the Teutonic and Majestic were now highly outdated, even after only 10 years. Now, we start to return to some of the more familiar White Star Line ships. Ismay turned to Harland & Wolff and commissioned a new class of 2 ships to be built. One would be named the Oceanic, after his company's first ship almost 30 years ago, and the other would be called the Olympic. But no, hold your horses, this is not the famous Olympic, sister of the Titanic. We're not there yet. In September 1899, the Oceanic sailed her maiden voyage, with the final construction work being the first major job under the direction of shipbuilder Thomas Andrews, and she was now the largest ship in the world. Well, largest aside from the now forgotten Great Eastern. Oh wait, no. She wasn't larger in terms of tonnage, which ships are measured by, but she was longer than the Great Eastern. Okay, we're getting there. We now have a ship that's longer than the Great Eastern. Thomas Ismay's health was declining, and this prompted the White Star Line and Harland & Wolff to scrap the plans for the Olympic, and her steel was used in the construction of other White Star Line ships soon to come. Thomas Ismay died in November of 1899, but not before visiting Belfast one last time, where he was awarded the key to the city for having done so much to boost the city's economy with his construction contracts. When Thomas died, the company was inherited by his son, J. Bruce Ismay, who was perhaps even more innovative than his father and would grow the company to new heights. Before his death, Thomas Ismay ordered one final ship from Harland and Wolff, the Celtic. It was to be shorter than the Oceanic, but heavier. As a result, it was the first ship to ever be considered officially larger than the Great Eastern. And we can now stop backhandedly insulting every other record-holding ship by comparing her to a failed paddle wheeler. I should pause for a moment and make a note about the Celtic. It's uncertain how it would have been pronounced, the British way with a hard C, as in Celtic, or the American way with a soft C, as in Celtic. I would have been inclined to assume the British way, but one of the stewards on her claimed they pronounced it the American way. This is our only source on the matter, so we will trust that. Bruce Ismay and Lord Perry of Harland and Wolff knew that they were onto something special with the Celtic. The Celtic had an amazing capacity for passenger accommodations, and due to her deliberate neglect of speed, she was coal efficient. The public was impressed by the ship, and the White Star Line decided to have 3 more near-identical liners built: the Cedric, the Baltic, and the Adriatic. This class of ships would soon become known as the Big Four. Getting these new ships to sea at this point was good timing, as one of the White Star Line's biggest charter companies, the Occidental and Oriental Line, was finally caving to the pressure from the Pacific Mail Steamship Company and was folding, while returning all chartered ships to the White Star Line, the International Mercantile Marine Company. Over the course of the 1890s, ships were constantly one-upping each other and recklessly competing with one another. J.P. Morgan, an American business tycoon, realized that if he could buy up all of these companies, they could be consolidated into a single company, stop wasting money competing with each other, and the profits would be enormous. He began buying up small shipping lines and set his sights on the White Star Line. While they initially resisted, they were in a financial hole as a result of the costs of the Big Four, and they agreed to be bought by Morgan's company, the International Mercantile Marine Company, in 1902, even before the last of the Big Four were sailing. The first 3 of the Big Four were each the largest ships in the world upon their completion, with the Cedric surpassing the Celtic and the Baltic surpassing the Cedric. The Adriatic did surpass the Baltic in size, but by this point, the entire class had been surpassed in size by a rival. We'll get to that shortly. The acquisition by the International Mercantile Marine Company, or IMMC, may sound like something negative, but it came with its advantages. The White Star Line was suddenly gifted with 4 brand new ships built for the Dominion Line, as well as the rights to run the Dominion Line's routes. These ships were repainted and renamed to fit the White Star Line brand. One of these ships, the SS Columbus, would be renamed the RMS Republic, would gain the nickname the Millionaire's Special after gaining favor from wealthy passengers who wanted to take voyages in the Mediterranean. This ship would wreck in 1909, supposedly carrying an excessive amount of gold on board. 2 years earlier, however, in 1907, massive change was coming for the White Star Line and the economic structure of Britain. Until now, every White Star Line ship was sailing out of the home port of Liverpool, but the IMMC was encouraging their ships to begin an express service in the south of England, where it would be benefited by the close proximity to London, the British capital, and could easily hop the channel to Cherbourg, France, and then off to Queenstown, Ireland. For many centuries, Southampton had been a maritime city, even being the city that the Mayflower Pilgrims departed from. But its docks were minuscule compared to the long, winding Mersey River flanked by docks at all points. But Southampton was able to foresee the change in the wind and invested heavily in rebuilding the city's docks to accommodate a larger amount of larger-sized ships. In 1907, the White Star Line began regular Wednesday departures out of Southampton Harbor. It was around this time that they started their Cherbourg services. However, some of the Big Four would continue to service Liverpool. As with every major company, just when it seems that they've gotten themselves into the position that they want to be in, a competing company throws a wrench into the system. That same year, 1907, the Cunard Line launched 2 new ships, even bigger than anything the White Star Line or the Germans had. These ships were the Lusitania and the Mauretania. Not only were they bigger, but they were faster and more luxurious. Cunard really hit the White Star Line hard with these ships. Not only were these ships prestigious, but they were partially financed by the British government as naval reserve ships, and to help maintain British authorities on the seas, because now that the White Star Line was owned by the IMMC, it was now an American entity. The Cunard Company had not been bought up by the IMMC. As a result, this threatened to destroy the IMMC's dominance of the seas. The IMMC needed to hit back, and hit back just as hard. Morgan began pouring money into their main interest, the White Star Line, and gave Bruce Ismay and William Peary free rein to design a new class of ships to compete with the Lusitania class. Their approach was simple. They followed the same pattern as they had in the past, using the same ship designs as the Big Four, and simply scaling them up with a few modernizations. They also resurrected the name Olympic, after Oceanic's cancelled sister ship. The new class of ships, the Olympic class, as you may have guessed, would consist of 3 of the largest ships the world had ever seen, each one bigger than the last. Construction began on the first 2 ships, the Olympic and the Titanic, in 1907, after Harland and Wolff completely rebuilt their shipyards to accommodate these giants. In the rebuilding of Southampton Harbor planned for that year, special berths were installed for the Olympic class as well. Around this time, Harland and Wolff was debating on which engine arrangement would be best for the Olympic class, so they decided to test 2 different designs on smaller White Star liners just about to enter service, the Laurentic and the Mercantile. The Laurentic was given a triple screw layout with 2 quadruple expansion engines and low-pressure turbine powering them, while the Mercantile was simply given 2 screws with 2 expansion engines. The Laurentic's design was picked. The Olympic first sailed in 1911, and like her very successful ancestor, the first Oceanic, her legendary career had a bumpy start. The Olympic suffered a collision with a British destroyer, then suffered losing a propeller blade, and at another point even bumped the pier in New York. But from then on, she had a very successful career and seemed to enjoy running down smaller ships. The Titanic set sail in 1912, and these 2 ships seemed like the answer to the White Star Line and IMMC's prayers, right? Wrong. Even though the Olympic class placed heavy emphasis on speed, Titanic hit an iceberg in a very unsavory manner and sank on her maiden voyage, with several key figures in the network of the White Star Line on board. Captain E.J. Smith, the unofficial Commodore of the White Star Line, was killed in the disaster, who had been serving with the White Star Line since the first Celtic of the original Oceanic class in the 1880s, as well as Thomas Andrews, the chief architect of Harland and Wolff Shipbuilders, who had been helping build White Star Line ships since the 1890s. J. Bruce Ismay himself was on board, helping load lifeboats and encouraging passengers to evacuate all throughout the disasters. Though he acted heroically during the sinking, he was longtime enemies with William Randolph Hearst, who owned the majority of news publications, and seized the opportunity to use the press and the media to destroy Ismay's life. This worked, and to this day, many people hate Bruce Ismay, all because of character assassination from the press. In the American Inquiry, Republican Senator William Alden Smith, who led the investigation, strongly criticized the very principle of the IMMC, accusing them of attempting to monopolize the industry, perhaps at the cost of safety. Shortly after, J.P. Morgan stepped down as president of the IMMC, and he died soon after. Some speculate the stress of the Titanic incident is what did in one of the most influential businessmen in all of Western history. The Titanic disaster cost the White Star Line and the IMMC millions in damages and lost revenue, not to mention a somewhat tarnished reputation and a loss of some very important figures in the company's network. But it's okay. The White Star Line has a 3rd ship in the Olympic class that's under construction right now that will help fill in the gap left by the lost Titanic. Right? Wrong. The First World War. Remember that time way back in 1889 when Queen Victoria was showing off her military and naval fleet at Spithead to Kaiser Wilhelm II? Remember when he said his country needs ships like this? Well, he got them. And he got a massive navy, too. And because of 100 other reasons that led up to an Austrian archduke getting shot in Sarajevo, the world was thrown into a massive war. The First World War. The British government had the power to requisition ships registered in their country to serve in the military, especially if their construction was partially funded by them. As the war grew, Britain requisitioned more and more civilian liners, converting them into troop ships, merchant transports, and even hospital ships. In most cases, the officers of the White Star Line were Naval Reserve, and they were called into military service at this point. The third of the Olympic class, the Britannic, was still under construction when war broke out, and the government completed her as a hospital ship. On one of her early voyages, she struck a mine and sank off the island of Kea in Greece. Of the trio of ships the White Star Line would count on to keep them in competition with their rivals, only one would ever complete a commercial voyage. At least half a dozen White Star Liners or former White Star Liners were lost during the First World War. The Oceanic II, the final ship Thomas Ismay saw go into service, was lost in the Shetland Islands, at the hands of the former crew of the Titanic. The Cymric, the ship that the White Star Line first attempted their luxury over speed strategy on, was torpedoed and sank with 5 deaths. The Georgic, one of the line's cargo ships, was scuttled, killing 1,200 horses in the cargo hold. The Laurentic, which was the prototype for the Olympic-class's engine arrangement, struck a mine off Ireland and sank with 354 souls on board. The Delphic and the Afric, 2 smaller liners built for the Australian routes, were torpedoed and sunk. The Arabic was also torpedoed with the loss of 44 lives, sparking a smaller-scaled outrage, as seen later with the sinking of the Lusitania. Worst of all, however, the former White Star Liner Runic, now called the Emo, collided with the French munitions ship Mont Blanc in Halifax Harbor. The munitions ship caught fire, and after about 17 minutes, it exploded in the largest man-made explosion prior to the atomic bombs, with a death toll of 2,000. The explosion occurred almost at the same pier where the cable ship Mackie Bennett unloaded the bodies of Titanic's victims, and about a mile from where the majority of the bodies were buried only 5 years prior. Meanwhile, the Olympic was in her element. She was rescuing people from shipwrecks, running down U-boats, helping evacuate American nationals from Europe, and transporting thousands of soldiers to the front. She was having a grand old time. After the war, in the end of 1918, World War I had ended, and it was time for the White Star Line to resume passenger service. There was a massive boom of immigrants wanting to leave behind war-torn Europe and move to the United States and Canada, and now the White Star Line had only the Olympic left of their primary ships. In 1914, the German Hamburg America line launched the SS Bismarck, but its construction was delayed by the war, and it never saw German service. However, this brand new ship was awarded to the White Star Line under the Treaty of Versailles as war reparations for the loss of the White Star Liners, and she was renamed the Majestic. White Star was also awarded the liner Columbus, which was renamed the Homeric. Business was booming once more, and the shipping companies were seeing bigger ships than ever before. Things were very quickly changing, however. The immigration wave was short-lived, and now these companies had to adapt their third-class accommodations into something more appealing. They began marketing these quarters as a budget option for the everyday tourist. The White Star Line also was one of the pioneers of the cruise ship idea, where the voyage itself was the destination of the journey, as opposed to just a means of traveling to your destination. They offered Mediterranean and holiday cruises, and even booze cruises on the Olympic for Americans during Prohibition. The German lines, despite the crippled economy in Germany, were still building record-breaking ships. The Europa and the Bremen were ordered in the late 1920s. Italy built the Rex, and France built the Ile-de-France, increasing competition. This was a bad omen for the RMS Olympic, which was now seen as outdated. In 1933, the Olympic had only around 9,000 passengers total for the entire year. In 1927, the White Star Line was purchased by the Royal Mail Steam Packet Company. One of the first things done by the new ownership was to order another, larger superliner to compete with these new German ships. The Oceanic III would be the first ship to surpass 1,000 feet in length. But the idea was short-lived. After only 1 or 2 years of construction, the ship was cancelled due to the Great Depression, and the in-progress hull was scrapped, with the materials being recycled into 2 slightly smaller liners, the Britannic III and the Georgic II. By this point, the White Star Line was beginning to fade out with a whimper. Its parent company, the Royal Mail Steam Packet Company, went bankrupt and liquidated in 1932. Only 5 years after acquiring the White Star Line. A new, similar company, the Royal Mail Lines Limited, purchased the White Star Line and continued its operations. The Cunard Line began construction on a superliner of their own, the RMS Queen Mary. But it too was struggling with money, and construction was put on hold. The British government agreed to bail the White Star and Cunard lines out, but only on the condition that they merge together. The companies agreed, and in 1934, they formed the Cunard White Star Limited. The share of ownership between the two companies was based on how many ships were brought to the table by which party. The White Star Line had 10 ships in her Atlantic fleet, while Cunard had 15, including the in-progress Queen Mary. As a result, Cunard was considered the dominant company, and given a larger share of the merger. Unfortunately for the White Star Line, they scrapped several of their ships only a couple years prior, and might have come out on top had they not done this. At this point, White Star Line also liquidated its Australia and New Zealand fleets. Now, White Star Line did not stand on its own feet, and was the minority shareholder in a government-subsidized merger. The Olympic was scrapped in 1937 alongside the Mauretania, and Bruce Ismay died along with it, passing away practically the same month as the Olympic. Cunard White Star continued business with the newer generations of liners. The Queen Mary, though primarily a Cunarder, entered service partially under the White Star Line name and is one of the last remaining White Star connections. In the late 1940s, Cunard bought out the White Star Line share of the company, and in 1950 Cunard White Star returned to simply Cunard. However, their ships continued to fly both flags until the last of the original White Star Line ships were retired from service. The last being the Cherbourg tender Nomadic, which is the only White Star Line ship still in existence today. Cunard Lines, which still sails ships and cruises, owns the name White Star Line and uses it for some of their services, but other than that, the company is gone. Out of respect, all Cunard ships fly the White Star Line flag annually on April 15th to commemorate the Titanic disaster. The White Star Line was in business one way or another for only 105 years, but has a rich and full history. Given the company's misfortune to have owned so many ships that are famous for having sank, such as the Titanic, Olympic, Britannic, Republic, and Ironic, it gets a bad reputation for mismanaging ships, owning shoddy vessels, and not following regulations, but unfortunately for them, none of these statements are true. Between the purchase of the White Star Line by Thomas Ismay in 1868 and the merger with the Cunard Line in 1834, the White Star Line owned or chartered 89 ships, not counting the ones pre-Ismay. For complete and detailed profiling of each and every one of these ships, check out this video's companion documentary, The Evolution of the White Star Line Fleet, available on our channel.